Raw Data Feel is the latest album from Everything Everything, a British band who have been on the scene for over 10 years at this point and have put out some really good material. I think it's pretty safe to say that their 2015 album, Get to Heaven, is easily their most revered album and is one of those cases, in my opinion, where the most revered, celebrated album is in fact my favourite and, you know, what I would consider the best album that they've put out to date. Not really much debate up there with that one. I think most fans would agree. And that's not to say that their other albums haven't been good. In fact, they've been quite good. I thought Fever Dream was solid. Even their last album, actually, I think initially I was a bit harsh on with my review. I'd bumped my score up a little bit more in hindsight, even if some of that Radiohead influence was pretty damning and obvious, to be honest. Like, it was so shameless on that album. And I don't like to be the guy that, you know, just points to Radiohead with everything, because I know a lot of critics and reviewers do that. But no, that album had so much blatant worship for Radiohead across it. But Raw Data Feel is challenging Get to Heaven, in my opinion, as being up there with the best again. This right here is easily the best album they've put out in quite a few years, and even before Get to Heaven, I put this above some of those albums too. I am having such a great time with Raw Data Feel. I think the album here just feels like a new, fresh, refreshing refresher, change of pace. They just seem to have changed enough with this new album here as a way to slightly shift things around a bit. It seems as though in terms of production, they are self-producing the entire thing, which isn't something that they had done with the past few albums. So it really shines through. It shines through that they're trying something a bit different. They've still got their core sound, but something is just clicking this time around. There's just such a great infectious energy to this album, whether it's through the vocals that have a nice mix of the falsetto, the kind of wacky over the top voice that Jonathan brings, but also some really subdued moments as well, and some really heartfelt moments, and also just him kind of restraining his voice and not going a bit too far with it on every song. Opening track sets the tone really well. I think this is just very much a decent pop tune with a really repetitive chorus that I don't necessarily find annoying or anything like that. I know sometimes, you know, repetitive hooks can just get a bit grating. I don't think that happens here. I Want to Love Like This is another pop focused track, pretty straightforward lyrically, although you've still got the typical everything isms coming through, like the opening line, "Why don't you listen to your mama, she's old." Like, it's just such a blunt opening line, so funny and so great, and how it catches you off guard. Just some really sticky melodies coming through here in the vocals. The chorus is really popping as well. They're just nailing it. The first few tracks, right up until like track 4, are just fantastic, and you can see why they chose these ones as singles too. You've got Bad Friday, which feels like drunken beer fear coming through. You can't really make heads or tails of what it is about that particular day that he's describing that as being so bad and being a battle and all that kind of stuff. It honestly just sounds like a really bad night where, you know, you're trying to scramble the next day thinking if you've done anything embarrassing after a night out. Maybe that's not exactly what he's going for, but I just feel like that's what the song ends up being like. And then Pizza Boy brings in the typical wacky ways of the band in the best kind of way, with the most absolutely bizarre lyrics you could ever imagine. I'll have a Coke, I'll have a Pepsi now, you are afraid. What does that even mean? What are you doing to your waitress, man? It's supposedly in a completely, well, not completely, mostly AI generated lyrical track. You can see how, but at the same time, this also feels very much something the band would write, because they have those weird moments coming through in their lyrics often on their previous albums. And this just kind of feels like it's celebrating that weirdness. I feel like later on in the album as well, you just get some really groovy groovy jams through tracks like Cut Up, which the guitar melody here is just fantastic, really brings a funky vibe to it. Just really love the rhythm on this track, and plenty of the other tracks across this album too just feel so rhythmic and so lively. The focus on the production for this album is so welcomed. It just brings such a positive vibe on tracks like My Computer as well. Everything just feels so uplifting and so inspiring, and also just really catchy at the same time. But then you've got these really down-to-earth moments as well, like Jennifer. My God, this track, holy shit, just a track that reminds me of Aries by Gorillaz, that kind of feeling that I got listening to that track, that really life-affirming feeling that track brings, and it brings it on this track here too, and it is just sublime. It's honestly so beautifully put together, lyrically as well. Very, very kind of scary imagery being conjured up with this girl Jennifer, and just kind of like driving into the black and things just not really working out. It's a really sad song at the core of it, but the way it sounds, it is just so blissful. The lyrics read as because all the pain in the end is all just a memory, try it again. Just a really heartbreaking line, to be honest, that has so much power behind it, and also has this kind of mysterious vibe to it, because you don't quite know what exactly it is that's going on with Jennifer. There is also the track Kevin's Car. Perhaps there's a link between those two there, because both being about, you know, driving. I don't know, you never know. Leviathan as well is so beautifully constructed. These two tracks are paired with some of the most beautiful sounding songs that they've ever made, I would say. You know, just this really like earthly feeling coming through this track, just really down to earth. And just the way the melody follows his voice as well, it's so angelic. I wouldn't necessarily imagine saying a word like that matching to an Everything song, because it's the last thing I'd ever think. But honestly, there is just such a beauty to this song, and then also the sentiment to the lyrics as well. Yeah, not the most inventive in the way it's, you know, framing the idea of love or anything like that, but it works when the song sounds this beautiful. I would say Born Under a Meteor as well is a great moment for the album. I like the idea of how this track just feels very specifically like working class with the way it's framed. Just the PlayStation 1 reference, and then the last of the bin bag line, that feels so British, saying something like that. But also this idea of how, you know, it's supposed to be a sort of, I guess, a sign of luck when a meteor strikes, or maybe even being born under a meteor is meant to be just a sign of, you know, oh, everything in this person's life is going to be great. But ultimately it's actually quite the opposite of that, and how being born under a meteor just didn't really bring those joys that he might have expected, or you might expect with that kind of luck. Again, an incredibly depressing lyrical idea, to be honest. There are some really like punishing moments lyrically on this album, I'd say, like especially with Jennifer and this track. It's not all positive, you know, but the way they frame it and the way they tackle these tracks, I think, is just perfectly done. And yeah, there's not much else more positive to say. Along with all these really fantastic groovy tracks as well, this is a really great album. I can't really say anything else. A huge step up, and like I say, I still think Get to Heaven is their best, but having an album that actually comes close to that, I wasn't quite expecting. I'd almost wrote them off, which is silly. I know you shouldn't write bands off, but it's silly to do. But I'd wrote them off more in the sense that I will like albums in the future, but I don't know if I will love albums in the future, and I don't know if there'll be anything that can even get close to Get to Heaven. But I was proven wrong, and I'm so glad I was, because this really is such a great album. And I'm going to go 8.5 out of 10. This is one of my favourites of the year so far, and I'm so glad to be saying that about Everything, especially considering it's not even been that long since their last one. And they've pulled it out the bag here. They've stepped things up with production, particularly, I think, but lyrically as well. Emotional aspects of the album really hit too at points. Yeah, this is great. I'm a big fan of this, and I'm so happy that they've really kicked it. They kicked it. They've really kicked it. Thank you for watching my review as always. Hopefully you agree, and hopefully you can let me know in the comments whether you do or don't, and why you do or don't. But thank you for watching. Do subscribe if you haven't already. Check out my Patreon as well. Would love to see people checking out that. That would be fantastic. Do have a good day, and goodbye.